So ladies and gentlemen, tonight is the 2021 BC Liberal Party Leadership Dialogue debate. And it's unusual for the Surrey Board of Trade or for a Chamber of Commerce, any Board of Trade to host a political party type of an event. But we decided to do this because Surrey is going to be the largest city in British Columbia very soon. Surrey's assets mean so much to British Columbia's economy, and this provided us with an opportunity to educate the candidates that are running, and we will do the same for any political party that is running for their leadership within British Columbia. I'm your moderator tonight. Our presenting sponsor. We can't have Board of Trade events without sponsorship. Let's give a great round of applause to the BM Group of companies. And ladies and gentlemen, we acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of our Coast Salish people, specifically the Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen First Nations, Coquitlam, and Kaikut peoples. And we also recognize that we live, learn, work, and play on the land of the Inuit and Métis peoples as well. These people have such a strong connection to our land, to the waters that surround Surrey. So ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to just recognize some government officials that are in the audience. Our candidates will introduce themselves very shortly, but thank you so much. MLA Surrey White Rock, Trevor Halford, for attending. And MLA for South Surrey, Stephanie Cadu. And ladies and gentlemen, I could not miss the opportunity to show you what the Surrey Board of Trade is all about and what our great city of Surrey is doing. So please turn your attention to the screen for a short video, please.
Offers to these companies, and it's an opportunity for me to be able to translate what the Surrey Board of Trade is doing for some of those companies and helping those companies to succeed.
If it's in the agricultural sector or in the retail sector, if they're needing a government connection, if they have an issue related to government, we are there for them, and we have a proven track record of success to ensure that businesses are helped.
You know, the Surrey Board of Trade it's a great organization because anybody who is involved in that organization wants to be a more proactive member of the community. So having an opportunity to connect and network with those individuals helps our business become better.
So the Surrey Board of Trade offers an immense amount of support for businesses at all levels, including entrepreneurs and startup businesses. There are resources that help a business that they wouldn't necessarily be able to afford to contract on their own, and it allows those to be accessible, sometimes free of cost. It also creates opportunities for networking.
Whether you're a new business that's just opening up shop in Surrey, Surrey Board of Trade has to be one of your top destinations. It will connect you with a lot of the great minds in the organization, a lot of great minds in the community that can help.
So whether you're a small business or a medium-sized business or a large business, starting out or expanding, we have the connections. We have the resources to ensure that you have what you need during your journey as an entrepreneur. And so, ladies and gentlemen, there's 450 chambers of commerce, boards of trades in the country. We're one of the top 10 largest, and we're proud to be Surrey's city building business organization. And I'm so honored to have members like the BM Group of Companies as part of our membership. Please help me welcome, representing the BM Group of Companies, Mr. Peter Fassbender. A round of applause, please.
Well, thank you, Anita. As most of you know, I'm now a recovering politician, so I welcome the opportunity to see the debate tonight. I'm honored to be the corporate ambassador for the BM Group, and the reason that the BM Group has stepped up to sponsor this event is they have 15 companies within their corporate family, all of them dedicated to providing jobs, building homes for people in Surrey and other communities throughout the Lower Mainland, and really providing opportunities for economic growth. So I want you to know that they're here tonight for one reason. Democracy is important. Seeing an election of a leadership candidate is important for this party, and the future of British Columbia is absolutely important to each and every one of us. To the candidates from Balraj and Jasbir who are here tonight, we wish you well. Have a great race, have a great debate, and at the end of the day, British Columbia is going to be better because of the effort that all of you are putting in to put your name forward. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Peter. So ladies and gentlemen, let's get right to it. And to those of you that are on stage, it takes great courage, I always say, to run for political office. And yes, we are a business organization. Our whole mandate is to support business, bring business into the city, but also issues related to the livability of our city, of our province, of our nation matter as well. And that's where the questions are going to be focused on this evening. So, ladies and gentlemen, each candidate is going to have the opportunity to introduce themselves for 1 minute. So, following the introductions, we'll begin our question period. Each candidate will be asked the same question in each round. So none of them have received the questions in advance. They're just going to be answering from their heart, basically. They all have 1 minute to respond. Our timekeeper, Jasrub Gosal, our policy and research manager, will raise a yellow card indicating that the speaker has 15 seconds remaining. Once the speaker's time is up, he will hold up a red card to indicate that your time is up and the speaker's microphone will be muted. After 5 rounds of questions, each candidate will be able to ask one question of another candidate. The same candidate cannot be asked a question twice. If a candidate has been asked a question, you will need to ask another candidate. So that means we're not just ganging up on one person. It's to really ensure that we have the brevity and of discussion here tonight. So I also ask all candidates tonight on stage to be respectful. So you can't swear at each other. You can't yell at each other. That just won't be tolerated here at the Surrey Board of Trade. And I know all of you, so I know you're all very professional. So thank you so much. All right, so let's get right to it. And Gavin, we're going to begin with you for your 1-minute introduction, please.
Thank you so much for having us, Anita. And let me start by acknowledging the Surrey Board of Trade. This is a central institution in Surrey, and more broadly, the chamber movement is critical to how our economy fits together. I've had the opportunity to work on massive major projects all across Canada, and I'll tell you something. Every time I go to a community that I've never been to before, where we want to do something, build something, start something, grow something, my first stop has always been the local chamber. And certainly I started coming to Surrey Board of Trade events almost a decade ago when I was working on trying to build the Trans Mountain Expansion Project. And Anita made us very welcome, was a great partner to work with. So I'm thankful for the chamber. I also want to express thanks more broadly for the work of the local business community, the Gurdwaras, and all the people that have been helpful as we've been getting through this terrible flood situation. It's that spirit of unity coming from the community that gets us through, that gives us hope, that makes us proud. And I hope we'll see that same spirit of unity here tonight and going forward in our party. Thank you.
Kevin.
Great. Well, thank you, Anita. And I too want to just share my appreciation for the Board of Trade. I'm proud to be a past honorary board member. And I can tell you both in the public sector and in the private sector, the Surrey Board of Trade is always there as a voice for the business community here in Surrey. And I think reflects the growing influence of Surrey. So thank you for the work that you do. I'm also proud to have two co-chairs from Surrey, both accomplished women, Diane Watts, our former mayor, who's here tonight. Diane, great to see you here. And Puneet Sander, who's my other co-chair, both again from Surrey. The reason is that Surrey is our future. The city likes to say the future lives in Surrey, but it really is true. I've always believed that, both in the public sector and the huge investments we made as part of a government here in Surrey, but also in the private sector, investing hundreds of millions of dollars in this community because I believe in the future of Surrey. And I look forward to having a good discussion tonight and how we can talk about how Surrey will overtake Vancouver and be the greatest, most dominant city in the province. Thank you.
Michael.
Well, thank you to the Surrey Board of Trade for welcoming us all here this evening. It's a very important discussion to be part of this leadership process for the BC Liberal Party. It's time. It's time for a different face of leadership for our party and our province. When my father came from Hong Kong in 1953, like so many new Canadians, he came here to build a better life for his children and his grandchildren. And we know that in terms of livability here in Surrey, housing, transportation, schools, hospitals, it's been a challenge. We have to think bigger, faster, and larger in terms of the years that come, how we can work with the Surrey community to build the infrastructure, both physical and social, that is necessary for the families here. And I know that as someone who's a relationship builder, it stands and it starts with relationships. We have to work together. It's not about the political gamesmanship, the horse trading, the kingsmakers or the queensmakers, all of that. We have to build true, authentic relationship. I look forward to doing that with you.
Bill.
Thank you, Anita. Well, as former CEO of the BC Chamber of Commerce, I don't have to tell you, I'm a fan of the Surrey Board of Trade. And Anita and I have worked, and Jez Roop and her team, on many files and many issues for years. So you also know I like to collaborate. But for BC to reach its full potential, we need Surrey to achieve its fullest potential, because the future of BC lives right here. Well, there's a problem. Surrey has been competing with a titan called Vancouver for too many years. You need to get your fair share. The ground is shifting, and it is time for Victoria and Ottawa to tune in. Surrey is going to be the largest city in a few years. Over half of your population speaks something other than English or French, and you're home to the largest urban Indigenous population in BC. You're young, you're strategically located, you're diversified. So British Columbia and Surrey need to leverage those strengths to tackle housing, transportation, and public safety out here. I'm going to run this party in the province and fund Surrey and south of the Fraser like we mean it.
Ellis.
Thank you. And at the second debate, I told the British Columbia public who I am, what I stand for. The 3 C's. The first C is competitor. I've always competed for people, families, and communities. It's the way I was raised. It's who I am. The second C courage. It's not enough just to speak about what is right in our society. We've got to speak against what is wrong. I've always had the courage to speak up in these types of issues. The third change. And we've heard it many times over the last few weeks about how we got to change as a party. We've got a vision for the party. I have a vision for the party. But for this to be accomplished, we have to change for the betterment, not only the BC Liberal Party, but also for the people of British Columbia and as for us as a province. And we can do this, but we've got to consider the 3 C's in a candidate: competitor, courage, and change. That's who I am. That's what I stand for. Thank you.
Renee.
Thank you so much. And a big welcome to the Surrey business community. I'm so honored to be here tonight because I would like to personally thank you. Thank you for how you have responded to growth, exponential growth, 1,500 new Surreyites every single month. That is extraordinary. But also for how you've responded in the midst of a pandemic in supporting your community. And then there's also the jobs that you create on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Congratulations. And as a business leader, I know how hard that is to actually do in the midst of chaos and crisis. But as a mother, I also believe in the softer side of what we do and how we do it. And that is the issues like public safety, mental health, homelessness, healthcare, hospitals, education and schools, etc. So tonight, I hope to inspire you as to where we can go together, not backwards, not sideways, forwards together.
So Renee, my first question is to you, and then we'll work this way to Ellis and Val and so forth, is Surrey is a small and medium-sized business community, but that is nothing to ignore. That is probably an estimation of $500 million in terms of overhead. It is BC's small and medium-sized business community that drives our economy. But we need tax reform. And one of the pieces that we've been advocating for to the BC government and also to the federal government is a comprehensive review and action plan of the taxes that are eroding our bottom line. And I speak specifically of the employer's health tax. If you became leader, any of you of the BC Liberal Party, what would you do about tax reform in British Columbia? Renee, over to you.
Well, Anita, you're absolutely right. The small and medium-sized businesses run BC. 98% of all employees are employed by small and medium-sized businesses. But it's more than that, because we actually require them in order to stimulate resiliency within our economy, to stimulate innovation within our economy, as well as recovery, which we are in the midst of right now. So in order to actually move forward, we need to create a business-friendly environment. And right now, the NDP are not doing that. In fact, they're saying businesses are not welcome here anymore. I would do a full review as the BC Liberal leader, but moreover as Premier, to make sure that we are welcoming to businesses, that we've created a competitive advantage for our businesses, and to make sure that they have what they need to move forward. That includes lowering bureaucracy and making sure that they have speed to market on innovation and innovative practices. But it also involves marrying industry with our entrepreneurs and our industry on moving forward.
Ellis.
Thank you. And you know, through this past 3 years, the NDP government has downloaded many taxes and costs down to small businesses because they just don't support the private sector. This is what I did for 15 years before I became an MLA. I developed economies, whether it be forestry, LNG, or mining, because I understood what an economy means to the people of British Columbia. But guess what? There's more on the way. In the last 3 months, the NDP released a survey asking British Columbians which taxes would they like to see increased to cover out the deficit funding for COVID, and which programs would you like to see cut? We're not out of this yet. In fact, this is why it's so important that we actually have to have change to win in 2024. Because there's more coming down the pike, and this NDP government does not like small business, big business. They don't like the cruise ship industry. Otherwise, they would have actually said something in the United States in terms of the ships coming from Alaska to Washington State. We need a new government, but for that, we need change.
Val.
Thanks, Anita. You hit the nail on the head. this is the most important question for this audience. And it's actually one of the most important questions in terms of how we're going to be tackling affordability in the years ahead, because if we can't get small businesses to scale up, we're not going to grow wages in this province. BC doesn't have a startup problem. We have a scale up problem. And Anita, the problem is our tax system. So when it comes to the EHT, I don't think any business owners in this audience don't disagree with that. We want healthy employees working in our companies. But it is bizarre to me that in an economy where we're saying we're supporting innovation, we've got pre-revenue technology companies being punished every time they hire a new person. This doesn't make sense. Let's get rid of machinery on PST and equipment. And you know what? I was out in Surrey today. I was chatting with Sherry Jiang. I'm not going to drink this on stage, but Dragon Mist Distillery, taxes are killing this business. She's doing great, but we could help her out. So let's do it.
Like,
I talked earlier about my father. My father, he owned and operated drugstores on the east side of Vancouver. Like any other small business owner, you take the risk. You employ and create jobs for good people to work in your communities. And under the NDP, all we've seen is 23 new and increased taxes, including the employer's health tax, which only limited growth on companies of a certain size. It was a deterrent. We need to restructure our tax regime here in this province after what it's been 4.5 years of NDP government, another 2.5 years on top. But like Ellis says, we have to win the next election to affect that change. And all we've seen under the NDP, of course, is the size of government grow by over 50%, debt levels to be the highest since the 1990s on every individual British Columbian. But we know we need a competitive tax regime and a competitive province in order to support those small businesses in their export abilities and their abilities to continue to create jobs and employ people here in this community.
Kevin.
I used to joke that we had a small business strategy, and that was to help small businesses get big. And the NDP's small business strategy is how to make big businesses small. And although it's a good punchline, the fact of the matter is what I've learned is it's unfortunately real. And for the business community here, you need to know this, that it's not that they're bad people, it's just they don't know what they're doing. And because they don't know what they're doing and none of them come from a business background, they make a lot of really bad decisions. So they'll do things like the cruise ship decision where they ignore warnings coming out of the US, or they'll load on new costs onto the business community, whether it's the employer health tax, or whether it's raising minimum wage in the middle of a COVID crisis, or whether it's increasing corporate tax rates, or whether it's just as they recently did 2 days ago, adding 5 paid work days. It's not that those are bad ideas. It's just that their timing is rather remarkable. And so we have to think about that. Think about the kind of government you want and what kind of affordability we want to see.
Gavin.
We're in a room full of business people, small, medium, large businesses. Everyone in this room understands the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat when it comes to building a business. That's what is not present in the NDP. There are smart people in the NDP who have many perspectives, but very few of them have any understanding of business. That is what's missing from our legislature today. That is why we need a new government. That is why we need new candidates who understand the full range of our economy. I'm so glad to hear Anita talk about comprehensive tax reform. That's something I've actually been talking about for months. My belief is we need to take a hard look at the entire tax system. We need to do so in a very principled way that modernizes it to suit the economy of today. And we need to do so in a way that's principled, where we acknowledge that there's only one taxpayer and they're tired of being nickeled and dimed, and where we acknowledge the cumulative burden of taxation, user fees, and all the other things that take dollars out of your jeans. So we need to be very principled about our approach. Thank you.
So Gavin, we'll begin with you. I just wanted to mention that Surrey has the greatest number of manufacturers within British Columbia. So tax mechanisms like the PST are so administratively burdensome. And so whatever it is that your party deliberates in the future, it really needs to support a growing, robust manufacturing sector, knowing that Surrey also has the greatest amount of industrial land inventory as well. We're a job creating capital within British Columbia. So Gavin, one of the other pieces that is eroding our bottom line, and we hear about it every single day at the Board of Trade, is workforce shortages. We know that the federal government has an immigration plan of over 600,000 newcomers. Many of them will reside in Surrey, Vancouver, et cetera. And then 400,000 international students over the next 3 years, really tying those industry needs to workforce needs. What would your party, if you were a leader, do to really address those workforce shortages that we're facing?
That's just a terrific question, Anita. This is something that we talked about all the time when I was on the board of KPU. It's something that I've talked about on the board of the Business Council, on the policy committee of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, a competing organization, but complementary, still loves Surrey Board of Trade. We need to make sure that we are drastically expanding capacity in those areas where we're just not training enough people. There are programs we've got where we could literally be increasing seats twofold, threefold, fourfold, and it still wouldn't keep up. So we've got to scale. Here in Surrey, there's a major problem in that there is not enough primary and secondary school capacity, and there's also nowhere near enough post-secondary capacity for people to get the high quality education and training that they want without having to go away from home. So we've got to fill that gap. And the one other thing I'll throw in here is that when I talk to small business people, one of the things they flag is that we can do all the education and training in the world, but if the employees that they want can't afford to live here, they won't come here, they won't stay here, and they won't work here.
Kevin.
One of the things that I've really found of interest and frankly of concern is that over the last 4.5 years that our friends in the NDP have been in power, we've seen about 50,000 jobs lost in the private sector, but the largest growth we've seen is in the public sector. Over 107,000 new full-time jobs. That's almost a 30% increase in the bureaucracy in 4.5 years. Now, I'm a former finance minister, and I can tell you, it almost takes a skill to hire that many people that quickly. But I guess I just have to ask everyone in this room, has anyone here noticed a 30% improvement in government services? Because I certainly haven't. And I'm left wondering, you know, at a time when we have private sector starving for workers, we've got a government that is hiring all these people. We have no idea what the heck they're all doing. But I do know at $100,000 per person, that's a $10 billion a year drag in the economy. I don't think that makes sense.
Michael.
I know that during the pandemic, the hospitality sector has been hard hit. Retail, when I travel around the province, we've talked a lot about small business owners that have a hard time getting the workforce to do the jobs that they need. And we should be looking at, again, how we continue to support our federal government on the way that they bring in temporary foreign workers, looking at the credentials, the point system on others coming into our country, because they have skills. New Canadians coming here have skills, and oftentimes they're not able to use them. And those foreign credentials need to be looked at because they add a lot to our country. And I know that as we look forward, the international student program, Langara College is in my riding of Vancouver, Langara. It grew from over 1,000 students to 4,000, many students coming from India. And we know that they need to find those opportunities here in our province, and I certainly support that.
Bill.
Thanks so much, Anita. So I used to be the CEO of the Whistler Chamber of Commerce, which powers 1/3 of BC's tourism economy. I can tell you that was my waking obsessive job when I was up there. How do we keep workers in this resort? How do we attract new workers to this resort? We came up with a radical idea. We said we are going to invest in our workforce unlike any other community. We did a world-class partnership with the Gustafson School of Business at UVic, and we delivered a world-class skill set to these young people that kept them in the resort because we kept them learning. So opportunities for partnerships with post-secondary institutions, huge. Transportation, which Anita, I assume we're going to get into later tonight. If you can't move around a community, you can't get to a job. It might limit your opportunities. Certainly if you're an employer and you can't get people around, this is hard stuff. So I think let's get creative. I agree with everything my colleagues have said on stage. We can do better with the feds on the temporary foreign worker program and the PNP program, et cetera, et cetera. So let's activate all solutions.
Ellis.
Oh, thank you. And the reason why I'm a big supporter of economic development in the first place was for workers. Where I came from, there was actually 75 to 85% annually for the last 30, 40 years. So this is why I push so hard for work all across sectors. But we've got to acknowledge something. Times are changing. That traditional workforce that we're depending on are millennials, but they're living in a different world. Technology is actually outpacing us all around the world. We've got to compete. For this, we've got to acknowledge this in our school system, as well in our workforce, as well as the traditional industries that we currently work in. There's technology advancements happening in every sector, whether you're talking about forestry, mining, LNG. We got to keep up. So we've got to actually talk the millennial language and live in that digital world and actually bring BC to a new economy to actually supplement our traditional economies.
Renee.
Well, back in 2006, we had a labor shortage as well. We had a desperate labor shortage, and we actually held trade fair and work fairs all around the world with strategic partnerships with countries whose credentials we did recognize and who could come over and work through the provincial nomination program. We need to activate that once more, because I know that for my businesses, I was able to increase my workforce by almost 20%. I added almost 30 individuals to my workforce during that time. So we do need to get very serious with who we are recruiting from and how we can expedite that process so that they come here with credentials already. We also need to look at our education system, not just our post-secondary, but all the way through our high schools, and look at how we can fast track into areas of employment of interest for those students and those individuals. And then we need to look at affordability and the cost of living, because we're not going to have a workforce that's actually attracted here unless they can afford to live here. Thanks.
Kevin, you're first on my next question, and it relates to the need for Surrey to have close to 42,000 more housing units to keep up with our population growth. And we know that we live in the most expensive part of Canada. And how do we make sure that people can live, learn, work, and play? What would you do as leader in terms of housing solutions?
Great question, Anita. There's two things that have to happen. Number one, we have to recognize that almost everything the current government's doing is the wrong thing. In 2018, they brought in a whole blizzard of new taxes on housing. Remember that? And that was about making housing more affordable. Here we are 3 years later. Who thinks housing got more affordable? Of course it didn't. 25% of the cost of every new home today is made up of taxes. I could list them all here, but it would take the entire debate. It's too many: federal, provincial, local. So we need to take a look at all the costs that we're imposing, especially on first-time buyers, and revisit that through the lens of a first-time buyer. Second thing, we can't let municipalities off the hook. I'm going to bring in legislative changes to ensure that we have certainty around the approval process, that we can get new supply into the market on a timely basis, so that we can provide those new homes that those 42,000 folks are going to need. That's the kind of leadership we need in the province right now.
Michael.
Well, we've seen here in Surrey, we've seen the efforts made to increase more accountability and transparency on community amenity contributions, more certainty and clarity on the charges and the fees. I think that's an important move. Just like Kevin said, we need to continue as a province to ensure that municipalities are doing their part to get the supply, the development cycle through quickly, to move forward with projects without adding so much cost, which makes housing so less affordable. But also when we look at the planning of transportation, the opportunities that we put public tax dollars into our community to build the extension of SkyTrain to Langley, for example, we need to ensure that that right level of density is being created as is being planned at Fleetwood, those 3 stations. When I saw that happen in my riding on the Cambie corridor, 50,000 residents being anticipated to go there over the next 15 years. For Fleetwood, it's over 100,000. This is the kind of density and planning we need.
Bill.
Thanks, Anita. So Metro Vancouver has a number of affordable housing projects going on right now. I want to read off my list here. 14 of them are happening in Vancouver, 9 of them are happening in Richmond, and just 5 of them are happening here in Surrey right now. South of the Fraser just isn't getting its fair share. So we need to be activating a number of solutions. One, I think Surrey and the provincial government can be doing more with affordable Housing BC, to get more projects going down here south of the Fraser. The other most important piece that I don't hear a lot of people talking about is, I think the most important job in a civil society is for the government in power to be providing adequate, dignified housing to its people. The problem with our system is a level of government that is set up to fail is in charge of housing. It is time for the province to step into that responsibility. We can be a partner to municipal government, but no more road blocking. Let's get it done.
Ellis.
We're talking about affordability here, and there's a lot of solutions up in the stage, even across BC for that matter. But we haven't really talked about inflation and cost of living, and specifically the wages that haven't kept up. There are tax reforms you can do, tax incentivized businesses, but also to increase the wages of millennials who want to buy their first house. But ultimately, I've never worked from the top down. All the success I've experienced was collaboration. In this case here, I'm talking about working with municipalities, and we have examples. The Langford mayor is not only aggressive in their solution to housing, he's actually progressive, giving a subsidy to first-time homebuyers. Burnaby, they've addressed the density issues, but the BC government needs to step in and they got to cooperate, and they've got to provide a working relationship with municipalities to address this housing affordability, because ultimately we can't let the dream of home ownership die for our children.
Renee.
Well, for the last 25 years, I've built homes, but I've also made it my life's work to increase housing affordability. And we're not going to do that unless we partner with municipalities and deliver to outcomes that are mandated and outcomes that gives surety to those municipalities that they're going to have a provincial government that will expedite the other levels of approvals and that will be there when it comes time for infrastructure projects. UBCM has asked for several different years to actually have that level of certainty and is getting nowhere with the NDP. We can do better, we can do different, and we need a different model. BC Housing is getting in the way. BC Housing is competing on the open market and making it less affordable for those end users. We are going to see rental rates skyrocket, and we're going to continue to see housing prices through the roof unless we take this very seriously and work alongside our municipalities.
Michael, you know, public safety matters to Surrey's business community. Oh, okay, sorry about that. Gavin, my apologies. My apologies. Gavin, you're
No,
next on housing.
This sequence gets confusing, don't worry. It's a little bit like getting a building permit. So listen, folks, we need to make it a heck of a lot easier to get through the building permit backlog. It's absolutely nuts. There's some good conversation happening in that regard. We need a hell of a lot more of it. And the truth is, we need to make sure that permitting processes aren't only advantageous to big developers with big money and the ability to hire big, well-connected consultants. We need to make sure that the little guy, the small builder, can navigate their way through the process and get to build homes for people. That's critically important. The other piece is this: Surrey has waited way too long for rapid transit. I was working on rapid transit for Surrey 10 years ago. I've been waiting to see it happen. I see Diane Watts nodding. We should have had rapid transit in Surrey a long time ago. Now that it's actually coming, we need to make sure that we don't miss out on the opportunity or dither and delay like they did on the Canby line. We need to make sure that there's clear agreement that when we build rapid transit, the taxpayers are going to get value for their money by seeing affordable housing with lower parking restrictions, more sustainability situated around every single one of those stations to make sure that we're enabling young people to afford to live here.
Thank you so much, Gavin. Michael, public safety matters to Surrey's business community. And you know, all of you know that there is a major public safety infrastructure shift happening in our city. It's affecting all of British Columbia. And we've said at the Surrey Board of Trade, it's going to affect the BC budget. It's going to affect safety in all of BC communities. If you were a leader of the BC Liberal Party, what would you do on this very important matter to British Columbians? Michael, over to you.
Well, Anita, if we're talking about the shift in terms of the Surrey Police Service, I know that that has been something that has been recognized by the BC government back in August of 2019. And as we go forward, there have been officers that have been hired to go forward with that service. But fundamentally, what's important is not the politics of this decision and how this is being implemented. It's about whether you will actually be safe in terms of your community, in terms of the effectiveness of the service. So we have to stop the political grandstanding on this issue. I think that we need to ensure from a provincial point of view that this implementation is done in a very appropriate manner and way, because as we go forward, we know that with the level of crime that's occurring in the Surrey community, that we need to have more accountability, a stronger way that the city of Surrey is able to hold accountable its police service here in the Surrey community.
Val.
Thanks, Anita. Look, every community wants to do better in terms of their police force and managing crime, but statistically, Surrey is a safe city. I've seen the numbers from your officer in charge. Diane's nodding again. I get to say it now. Surrey is doing well. But Vancouver, Langley, and Abbotsford, it gets lost in the narrative. Once the media gets a hold of a story, they can't let go of it. Statistically, per capita, they have more violent crime than Surrey. So let me say this. I love Canada's RCMP. In Canada, we love maple syrup, we love maple leaf, not maple leafs, and we love our Mounties. But what this city needs is a process that is clear and transparent because it involves public trust. So if you don't have that, you don't get it on the other side. What Surrey needed was a model that was clear and discussed with the public. We need to find out how it was going to be costed. We needed a referendum and we needed a transparent process. I love all our law enforcement officers, but let's be transparent and clear about this.
Ellis.
Yeah, well, attacking frontline enforcement is actually NDP divisive politics. And I've never agreed with that. In fact, as a leader in my own community, I actually signed a tripartite agreement with the BC and the federal government in terms of RCP coming into our community and enforcing the law because my community members wanted it. This is what every community wants all across BC. They want a safe community. But in terms of what the NDP government are doing, they've invested 130,000 new jobs in this government, but they haven't enforced in frontline policing. This is another method of actually dividing British Columbians on a topic that's actually important to all of us. In terms of what we need to do next, we need to use the Forfeiture Act because drug dealers, they shouldn't be driving around in $100,000 cars and living in luxury, while law-abiding citizens are just struggling just to buy a house or trying to address affordability. We've got to address the crime, but it's got to be done with a government that truly cares about our communities. I do. That's why I'm running in this race.
Renee.
Well, thanks. Surrey is the only city that's over 300,000 people without its own force. But this has been a very choppy process, and I won't go through all of the details that Val has acknowledged. But there has been a cry for more accountability, more autonomy, more local focus, and really the unique needs of Surrey need to be addressed. But I'm not sure if we'd actually be having this conversation if the province was doing its job. Because 65% of all policing calls right now on the Lower Mainland are mental health related. Sit with that for a second, 65%. Think about how many more front-facing officers would be available if the province was actually taking care of those who need it the most. BC has a mental health and a mental illness problem, and one that is so complex and has so many root causes that we need to deal with things differently. If we fix that, we'll fix policing as well.
Gavin.
Everyone's put it quite well that we need a clear, fair, transparent process in terms of this conversation. So let's talk about the root causes for why people are feeling concerned about rising crime or a perception of rising crime. We need to get to the underlying issues in terms of mental health. We need to get to the underlying issues in terms of addiction and the breakdown of families. We need to get down to the fact that there are people who are profiteering off of misery and off of murdering people. So we need to make absolutely sure that we're taking to task the gangsters that are profiteering. And I think part of that is we need to be smart around a whole broad range of policies. One example I'll cite is that this government is systematically failing on the $8 billion cannabis sector, 75% of which remains underground and dominated by criminals. They have enacted a set of policies that are allowing gangsters instead of government to tax the cannabis sector. We need to be much smarter about that. And if we do so, we'll reduce crime.
Kevin.
Sorry, I'm just laughing. I'm thinking about the fact this is the only government that could lose money in the cannabis business. But anyhow, they're incredible. Look, I think we have one job as government, frankly, and that is to make sure people can feel safe in their own communities. That is the most important job of government. And, you know, Surrey makes this decision. They decide what kind of police force they're going to have. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. But I will say this. I am a little bit shocked and surprised at the total disinterest apparently the province is taking over the fact that this massive second largest community in the province is going through a change, and they appear to have this complete hands-off attitude until recently, where they've said, actually, we're now going to limit you so you can't take police from any other local police force into the Surrey Police Department, which is creating a challenge for hiring. And I just wish that the province would step forward and do their role and make sure that this is a successful transition, because we want to make sure that people can feel safe in our community. It's important, folks.
Val, my question to you is related to climate change, the floods that we're facing right now. Another storm is coming tomorrow. Certainly all throughout the province, including Surrey, we're facing those dire consequences to our economy, not only related to the disasters of climate change, but also supply chain issues. If you're a leader of the BC Liberal Party, how would you address these very important issues that are not going to go away?
Yeah, I mean, this is the existential question and crisis of our times. And when I think through the lens of the BC Liberal Party, which brought North America's first revenue neutral carbon tax to British Columbia, and we led the way on the environment, we have been a party that has shown those progressive leadership values when it comes to environment. We can again. The only problem is we've been myopically obsessed with just emissions only. We need to be talking about adaptation and mitigation now. Anita, you hit the nail on the head. We are living in a world now where we are seeing the effects of extreme climate change. We need to get better with our risk planning and assessment. We need to change our existing infrastructure. We need to lift roads. We need to put in bigger culverts, and we need to monitor and maintain our infrastructure completely differently than how we have in the past. So average temperatures are rising. Average voters know this. They want a party that is going to take action on this issue and think down the road and be proactive. Thanks, Anita.
Ellis.
Yes, thank you, Anita. And in an introduction, it said that the First Nations actually have a connection to land, water, and air. Couldn't have said it better myself. In fact, I inherited that from the ancestors who actually fought for the river, for the air emissions, as well as the land impacts that have been impacting my community for the last 60 years. And we did it in collaboration with the BC government as well as industry. But moving forward, we've got to actually address some of the environmental impacts that we're currently seeing. That's why I propose to say, if a carbon tax is essentially an environmental tax, why are we not using this to actually remediate and repair our infrastructure? This is where it should be going. On top of that, we're talking about supply chain. And that goes back to the carbon tax again. Taxes on fuel for truckers are making everyday goods more unaffordable for people. We've got to address this if we really want to address the environmental issues that we're facing, as well as supply chain issues. This goes for farmers as well. If we're talking about food security, why are we making it so hard for people to actually bring us goods and services and actually grow the food?
Renee.
I was on Instagram the other day and saw my daughter's story and quickly texted her and said, babe, what are you doing? You were at a protest today at the ledge. And she goes, I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to get you in trouble. And I said, what are you talking about? I would have joined. Next time, just let me know you're there. It's time for us to get serious about our environment because it's table stakes to our next generation. They care a lot. And if we don't take care of our ecosystems, people suffer with smoky air filling their lungs. Industry suffers with disruption. Our water systems are strained and our carbon footprint grows, just like it has under the NDP consistently over the last 4 years. We need a leader who can actually understand how to protect our environment as well as stimulate our economy, because it's not either or, it's and.
Gavin.
Climate change is the challenge of our time, but it's also the opportunity of our time. We have a chance as a province to export our leadership, export our clean commodities, export all kinds of opportunity, and make a lot of money doing it. And we should be unashamed of that fact. It is a huge, massive opportunity. Canada as a whole is 1.5% of global emissions. BC is a fraction of that. We can have a much bigger impact by exporting leadership, and we should do so. I don't want to leave neglected the infrastructure part of this conversation. After 9/11, the American government had a very serious conversation, and they actually created a role years later in the White House called Director of Critical Infrastructure Continuity. We need to get a lot more serious about the way that we proactively address critical infrastructure, trade links, the ability to move goods. And I think that the floods recently have been our wake-up call in that regard. And we need to start taking the blacktop politics out of our approach to infrastructure and start dealing with it in a nonpartisan, serious, proactive way. Thanks.
Kevin.
Thank you. When I launched my campaign for leadership of the BC Liberal Party, I said there was three things I really wanted to focus on. The first was environment and climate change. Second was affordable childcare. And the third was housing affordability. I think the environment and climate change is a really, really important one. When I was Minister of Transportation, we brought in the revenue neutral carbon tax. I'll tell you, in Surrey, it wasn't the easiest thing to bring in. And our opposition, the NDP, fought a campaign against us in 2009, trying to oppose us on that. But I'm proud that we did it then, and I'm proud we were the first government in North America. Why? Because the revenue neutral part meant that every revenue dollar had to go back into lower personal taxes and business taxes, which gave us the lowest tax rates in the country. And that's something I'm proud of. But we also have to invest in what I call resiliency infrastructure. That means we have to invest beforehand so that when the next floods do come, as they will, as the climate changes, we will be ready.
Michael.
We've had so many challenges face us with the flooding, the heat dome, the wildfires, the pandemic, of course. There's a lot that we need to deal with as British Columbians, and we need leadership from our government. You know you're in trouble when the Godaras here in Surrey are doing more than the cabinet for the NDP in responding to this emergency. They were asleep. They weren't caring about those who were flooding, those farmers, those who needed warnings, the alert ready system near Lillooet, those who lost their lives. But we know we have a challenge in front of us, and it has to be done in balance. We need to have a full Ministry of Emergency Preparedness. We need to review our critical infrastructure. We need to reinvest to ensure that we have stable infrastructure to meet the changing climate demands on our province. But we also have to do our part. BC can lead the country again in climate leadership as it has in the past. We can continue to use those resources for innovative, better uses.
Ellis, my question to you is related to the fact that Surrey has the highest urban Indigenous population within British Columbia. They're a significant partner in economic development. If you're a leader of the BC Liberal Party, how would you collaborate with our Indigenous peoples in British Columbia?
A specific question that actually doesn't just include BC. There's actually there's a term called off-reserve Indians, natives, indigenous people. It's actually under the Indian Act where a band council can only look after those people living on reserve. This is partly why I actually got into economic development in the first place, because with the revenues that we earned, we were allowed to actually use those revenues to support our people living in urban areas all across BC. And we did. Mission accomplished. But in terms of what BC is doing right now, you can do more. There's a lot of First Nations now that want to move into the urban areas, but have their own little communities setting up. It doesn't have to be a reserve. It could be a hybrid. But ultimately, if you want to address this, you've got to work with the elected band councillors. You've got to address the Indian Act. You've got to address Aboriginal rights and title. You've got to address it. It's the #1 issue facing Canadians and British Columbians and Aboriginals today in BC and across Canada. But guess what? The BC Liberals did the best job over the last 17 years than any other political party in BC.
Renee.
Well, Indigenous do want environmental and economic sustainability. Businesses want certainty, and BC government needs to lead the charge on reconciliation. Yeah, I've been partnering with Indigenous groups for the last 20 years and building relationships, building economic growth, understanding the culture, and really supporting the Indigenous people's future. Right now, the Indigenous are almost low on every indicator, whether it's health or education, whether it's supports, whether it's housing, across the board. Reconciliation for me is about partnership. It's about relationship. It's about building trust and a desire to move forward together. And it's a conversation, not just lip service, but it's time that we actually started moving in the right direction. And we can do that. It's not impossible. And I'll piggyback on what Ellis said, and that is that we need to start thinking outside the box. We need to start partnerships that look a little different than what we've done before, and we absolutely can.
Gavin.
I think that we're at the beginning of an Indigenous renaissance in Canada. We've reckoned with some difficult truths. We've gone through some very dark times and some difficult conversations, but we're also seeing this unfurling of opportunity, both in terms of a new cultural awareness and also an economic set of opportunities for First Nations. So I think we have to choose to embrace a culture shift in the way that we think about First Nations and opportunity. I think we also need to recognize that having done some economic development work with First Nations, if you've met with a First Nation, you've met with one First Nation. If you've met with a First Nations person, you've met with one First Nations person. Every single band and every single individual is different. And I think it's very, very important that whether it be as government or whether it be in the private sector, we start with the recognition that each individual has different wants and needs and aspirations, and we work with them on that basis as people.
Kevin.
Well, I think we need to recognize that there are a new generation of Indigenous leaders that are rising in every part of this province. Ellis Ross is one of them. There would be no LNG today if it was not for Ellis Ross and his leadership in the Haisla. And I take my hat off to him because he's done a phenomenal job. And it's important to know that there are other leaders too that in the First Nations communities, they're doing phenomenal work. I think of Chief Louie and the Osoyoos Band, or the Squamish or the Tsleil-Waututh and others that are just doing remarkable work. And what we need to do is make sure we keep working with them with open palms, on a build that trusting relationship, make sure that we have mutual successes. And as we build trust and as we build economic success, we will see more leaders like Ellis rising up and becoming tremendous champions of economic development in First Nations. And that's something I'm very proud to see.
Michael.
Well, thanks, Anita, for this question. I think it is a critical question next to climate change for our province. We need to have that partnership and that certainty as we move forward. And I know that when I ran to be leader of this party, it was on the theme of restoring trust. And that trust relationship has been broken with this current government. When they brought in the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it's a bill that I debated on behalf of the team alongside of Mike DeYoung. Government set the expectations up to here that they're not meeting. And when you fail to meet the expectations that you set up here, you break trust. We need to resort that. And of course, we know all the challenges that have been happening over the last many decades for so long. I spent 20 years in my legal career working in mining, forestry, and energy, working on those sorts of agreements and partnerships with First Nations. We have the legacy of John Rustad when he was the Minister of Indigenous Relations as well.
Val.
Thanks, Anita. BC's future, Surrey's future depends on how we empower and work with our Indigenous communities here in BC, without a doubt. Carol Ann Hilton, a brilliant Indigenous academic, talks about in her book, Indigenomics, unlocking the Indigenous business opportunity here in Canada. It is a multi-billion-dollar opportunity, but forget the economics for a second. It's the right thing to do. These Indigenous communities, they want to self-actualize, they want to heal, they want to see their children laughing again. That's what I'm hearing from leaders around BC in the Indigenous community. What I think is so exciting, seeing what the Fort Nelson First Nations are doing right now, just outside of Fort Nelson up in Northeast BC, the Tudeka geothermal project. It's opportunity, it's revenue, it's local jobs, but it's food security, because that geothermal power is going to power greenhouses and they're going to grow their own food. So we do this opportunity together.
Gavin, you have 30 seconds to choose a candidate and ask a question. You have 30 seconds to get your question out there, and the respondent has 1 minute to respond. So just watch Jasroop and his timing. So Gavin, over to you.
There will be a change to electoral boundaries before the next election that will drastically shift the balance of power in this province from rural to urban, and will place even more power in the hands of urban and suburban residents, and especially those young swing voters who are the urban and suburban families in places like Surrey. Ellis, what's your strategy to win the Lower Mainland?
Thank you, Gavin. And exactly what I'm doing now. Go out to those ridings in Surrey. Go out to those ridings in Richmond, Maple Ridge, Park Coquitlam, and don't tell them what they need. Ask them, why did you leave our party? And those answers coming back are pretty hard hitting. It's not fun sitting in front of there, but we've got to accept those answers because the demographics of BC have changed. Everybody moving out of Vancouver into Maple Ridge and all these other southern communities, we didn't keep up. BC didn't keep up. And this is the anger and the resentment I'm getting back. But I also make a commitment. I'll come back. I'll listen again. I'll keep coming back to Richmond 5 times, Surrey 3 times, going to the temples and talking to people and just listening and say, look, I'm going to make a commitment to do better, because that's what I made the most success for me back home. Just listening and understanding. That's how you build a future. That's how you run a party. But ultimately, that's how you get the faith back from British Columbia's in a party like the BC Liberals.
Kevin.
You know, affordable childcare, I think, is one of the best economic measures that a government could bring in. It's why I support $10 a day affordable childcare targeted to those that need it most. So I think that the single mom in Wally who's got a couple of kids and needs to, wants to return to the workforce and wants to know that government has her back. And Gavin, I know you and your wife operate a daycare business, and you know more than anyone else how important it is that for us to get the real $10 a day daycare, we need to have a lot of spaces. And we need to have the kind of spaces that offer flexibility. Oh, no. I was just getting to the best part.
I'll infer the question, Kevin.
It's, yeah.
Look, we need more childcare in order to lift up the dreams of women in particular in the workforce, but we don't need to crush the dreams of other women in order to do that. And one of the great frustrations that I hear from childcare operators all over this province is that this NDP government seems to have decided that government knows best and only government or programs that they enact can deliver childcare. I think of Sandra Christian, who's a childcare operator here in Surrey, the winner of an Entrepreneur of the Year award from the Surrey Board of Trade. Sandra runs 8 childcare centers, and people like her are under pressure from this government where they feel as if they're being forced out of the market. The result of that is we're losing childcare spaces instead of gaining them. We're going to see higher costs instead of lower costs once you take into account the higher cost of creating government-driven spaces versus the private sector. You're seeing less responsiveness, less spaces for less kids. We can do better than that.
Michael.
Well, Renee, as you know, in the last debate, I seem to have this habit of asking people about their emails that they send out. So here's one for you. You recently sent an email out to members about how you're the only candidate in this race who has both diversity and merit. Just to ask you, is there not anybody else on this stage who has both diversity and merit as well?
Oh, that's a great question, Michael. And I think that what I was speaking to was having been a woman in a male-dominated industry, having fought for 25 years, whether that was to actually be seen, to be heard, to have capital and venture capital being granted, or to be actually moving forward on a business front. There were lots of things that I had to do. My CFO is almost 20 years older than I am. Why? Because I needed someone that when we walked into a room, he would be addressed as, oh, nice to meet you, Renee. Nope, that's me. But as you've been addressing me, Mr. Renee, over the course of the last 30 email correspondence back and forth, I just wanted to be true to who I actually was and show up in person. So my diversity has been in a very male-dominated industry, and I've fought tooth and nail to get to where I am from a business perspective. 31 businesses, over 11 different industries across Western Canada.
Val.
Thanks, Anita. We were talking about small business quite a bit tonight. I talked about how in BC we don't have a startup problem, we have a scale-up problem. I was sitting with Dick Jones this morning at Teal Jones Mill in Surrey, and was talking about, this is a shingle, by the way. I'm not going to beat one of my colleagues with it up here on stage, but we have a problem in BC around scaling up small business. So Michael, you've been an effective legislator in Victoria to support small business. What are some of the ideas you have to scale up small businesses here in BC so we can grow the pie?
Well, Val, let me first say that I'm sorry that we all didn't bring props here. So you got 2 points for props. That's great. So I also, before I became a member for the Legislative Assembly in 2017, I was a lawyer, as I mentioned earlier, for 20 years. And working with small businesses in terms of supporting their abilities, you need to ensure that, from a government point of view, we create the right tax structure, as we talked about earlier, that we provide the right supports from a market point of view as well. BC has a brand, and including its wood products. So we've seen all sorts of decisions on this NDP government that fail to understand the workers whose lives and livelihoods depend on ensuring that there's fiber supply, that we have that secondary supply, that we can do the value-added product work that Teal Jones does. So we know that we have to have the right regulatory framework to ensure there is balance, whether it's old growth or ensuring that we do have the right fiber supply to support value-added producers.
Ellis.
Thank you. And you know what? Surrey has been the fastest growing city for the last 30 years. Successive governments have known this, whether we're talking about the services that are provided to Surrey through, say, the hospital or schools. That's why I actually committed to actually replacing portables in my first term as leading the BC Liberal Party as well as leading BC government. So, Val, will you join me in making this commitment to the people of Surrey?
Say the last bit again, I missed it. Will I commit to?
Making the commitment to replacing portables in the school system
Yeah.
for Surrey.
Great, thank you. So this gets to the core of what this BC Liberal Party needs to figure out to renew. We have always been a party of fiscal responsibility. Now we need to become a party of social awareness. Kevin's been talking about on stage tonight, childcare. We can be a party that champions education. Now, we used to be the party of AAA credit ratings and balanced budgets, but it's hard to get into balanced budgets and low debt to GDP ratios if your kids have been having their entire high school experience in a portable. We've got, I think, around 326 portables now in Surrey. That's enough, too much. The problem is we are already behind the 8 ball in terms of catching up. The theme you're hearing from me again and again tonight is we need to fund Surrey and south of the Fraser. They need to get their fair share. So yes, let's get rid of the portables. Let's build more schools, but it's going to take some velocity and tempo to get there. But we can do it, and we can be the party that brings that to BC and south of the Fraser.
Renee.
7 out of 28. That's how many female BC Liberal MLAs there are. 7 out of 28. How are we going to get more? There's no mystery who my question is going to. So Kevin, how are you going to attract new female MLAs? How are you going to promote female MLAs? And how are you going to champion the next generation of female MLAs?
Great question. And there's 2 ways I would answer that. Number one, you have to demonstrate by action as a leader. So the 2 campaign co-chairs I mentioned in my campaign, Dan Watts and Puneet Sander, that's important because they are exactly the kind of accomplished women that we need to draw in. You too, Renee, actually, I would argue are one of the best examples of how we're going to attract more highly competent women into this party because they have to see themselves represented in the party. But I'll also tell you this, as a leader, you have to go out and you have to recruit them. You can't just hope that they'll show up because you need to go out and say, listen, I know it's hard to do and it's a big sacrifice for your family. It's a big sacrifice for your business, but I need you to do this. It's important that we attract really great candidates and you're one of them. And that's what I intend to do as leader of this party is to go out working with great MLAs like yourself and go find those great candidates and encourage them and support them to be the next MLAs in our party.
Gavin, my question to you is related to transportation. And certainly at the Surrey Board of Trade, we consider transportation and education to be the driving foundations of an economy. But we've been starved in Surrey and in the South Fraser Economic Region of transportation investments. SkyTrain is a regional transportation solution, but you can fit the cities of Vancouver, Richmond, Burnaby into our geographic limits. We need a transportation solution for our city to move people to their jobs, to places where they can play. How would you, as leader of the BC Liberal Party, work with Surrey to ensure that we have the transportation solutions for our city?
Hard, fast, and often. We need to get moving on transit. Look, I'm just going to tell you guys the reality. One of the reasons why we're not in government right now is that we stopped building stuff. I remember 10 years ago, helping to prepare for the rollout of transit to Surrey. I ran one of their first advocacy campaigns to get the Broadway line built in Vancouver. We need to get back to building stuff. And from a partisan perspective, the truth is, what we've actually got to do is we've got to leapfrog back into leadership, because we left a raft of projects and a raft of money and a balanced a surplus budget for the NDP to cut ribbons on things that we should have been doing a long time ago. So we have to work with municipalities. We have to leapfrog back into leadership to start building things. And we have to be unafraid to get moving on that front. And we absolutely have to rebuild a really strong, good relationship with municipal leaders all over the province, and in particular here in Surrey.
Kevin.
I think the most important thing is to look at track record. So I built the Portman Bridge. I built the Canada Line in spite of the fact that a whole bunch of mayors were opposed to it. I jammed it through because it was the right thing to do, because I was thinking about the next generation. And what really, and same with the South Fraser Permanent Road, and I could go on, but what really concerns me about our current government is they're not building anything. In fact, they're canceling projects. Do you know the 10-lane Massey Tunnel Bridge that was started by the BC Liberals, $100 million invested in excavation and soil work? That would have been opening next summer. And the 10-lane bridge would have meant 2 lanes dedicated for buses, but 4 lanes in each direction for commuter traffic. But most importantly, it was designed to allow rapid transit so we could connect the Bridgeport SkyTrain station with South Surrey. That's thinking about the next generation, folks. And what we've got are people that don't know how to execute and build. The Patalo Bridge, they're replacing with a 4-lane bridge. That's what we've had since 1938, for goodness sakes. We need better. We need leadership.
Michael.
We need leadership, and we also need to end this discriminatory practice of the community benefit agreements. That's us adding hundreds of millions of dollars and delaying projects like the Patella Bridge, like the Broadway subway project in my area of city of Vancouver. But we know even the Surrey to Langley SkyTrain extension is delayed to 2028. This government does not know how to get things done. But we also know, Anita, when you talk about Surrey itself, that we have to work with the city here as well to look at all the hubs with Fleetwood and Guildford, Newton, and South Surrey and Cloverdale, how it can connect with Central City. We need to ensure that we support the mechanisms to look at the planning, because the way we can do that with the city of Surrey will only enable more housing supply to be created, better livability for this region.
Bill.
Thanks so much, Anita. Making sure Surrey and south of the Fraser is obviously connected to the broader region is essential, but we need to connect Surrey to itself. There's only 4 SkyTrain stops in Surrey. Compare that to Vancouver, Burnaby, Richmond. There's no comparison. It doesn't work for me. You've got massive transportation dead zones in this part of the Lower Mainland. Fraser Heights, Cloverdale, vast swaths of Stephanie Cadew's riding in South Surrey. You got 20,000 people driving to Campbell Heights every morning in their own cars. It doesn't make sense. So what I'm saying to the south of the Fraser is you will have me as a partner to the feds, to every other level of government that we need to be working with to make sure we get obviously transportation to and from Surrey. But so you're getting connected with yourself. Let's turn this into a supremely livable city where new Canadians are getting to new jobs, are getting their kids to school, and they're feeling connected to community.
Ellis.
SkyTrain for Surrey was a great start, but it's not the finish. In fact, if anything, Surrey's congestion problems are because people in Langley and surrounding areas are going through Surrey. So we need a SkyTrain to get out to Langley to reduce that congestion. In fact, if anything, we need a comprehensive transportation plan that survives politics. The Massey Tunnel replacement should never have been canceled because it affects all of British Columbians. It affects our economy. It affects our trade. It affects people that can't get home in time to put their kids to bed. This matters to British Columbians. In fact, if anything, the last thing I'll add to you, government spends taxpayers' money. That's a given. That's the experience that comes from ministers and government. It takes people to develop an economy to actually fill up those coffers in the first place. We can do both. And we proved this up in Kitimat with all the resource development projects that actually not only benefit my region, but also benefit all of British Columbia for all those infrastructure projects and transportation projects that British Columbians want and need.
Renee.
We have to look at transportation a different way. It's not just about roads and bridges and buses and trains, but productivity, planning, affordability. And we need to look at it from a bigger picture and from a wider lens. And we've talked about how few investments have been made south of the Fraser. But what happens if you miss the last train? What happens if someone has to wait an hour and a half in traffic? What happens when there's accidents? Everything stops. People stop moving. If we don't get serious about our transportation, we're losing within our economy, but we're also losing within our family systems. We're losing within our structures. We're losing in our connectivity as a community. The Massey Bridge expansion was a great example, not just because of how it was planned originally, but also of what it could have done in the future. We need to stop moving and playing catch up. We need to leapfrog forward and actually look at transportation and where Surrey is going to be as a population larger than Vancouver. Thank you.
Kevin, Surrey was at ground zero during the pandemic in terms of COVID-19 cases for a period of time. And we sat on the Premier's Economic Recovery Task Force. We met with Dr. Bonnie Henry almost every week. Do you think, given the size of Fraser Health, but maybe even generally speaking for British Columbia, that there needs to be a reform in terms of health authorities to address growing populations?
You know, the problem that you have in government is too often government tries to fiddle around with the infrastructure as opposed to just focusing on outcomes and results. I'll tell you what Surrey needs is doctors at the time you need the doctor. They need nurses to be looking after you when you're in the hospital. They need hospital beds, which is why we did the $500 million expansion of Surrey Memorial Hospital. It's why we got to continue to invest in the Peace Arch Hospital. It's why even investments in Langley and the second hospital that the NDP talk about but didn't budget for is important. But you should know this, it's not going to be a second hospital. They're building an urgent care center. So they got to stop pretending it's a hospital when it's not. But I'll tell you what really has to happen is we got to make sure that folks are connected to a family physician. It is critically important that they have that connection to a family physician because that will help them deal with a lot of their emergent and urgent needs on a weekly, monthly, and yearly basis.
Michael.
Well, Anita, certainly I understand your concern, and coming out of this pandemic, every single tax dollar is going to count. With over 50% of our budget and our tax dollars going to pay for our healthcare system, with many of you living longer and healthier lives, hopefully all of you, this is going to be a challenge. We need to find more options and choice in our healthcare system, but we also need to look at our healthcare authorities and the structures that are in place. Because I know as I travel around the province and I look at other healthcare authorities as well, there is so much bureaucracy, so much administration burden that's there. When decisions that should be made in Cranbrook as a regional hospital area for the Kootenays are being made in Kelowna. The same thing when it's happening in Fort St. John. It's being made in Prince George. So we do need better decision-making, more effective decision-making, but we also need to look at the cost structure and where we're putting our tax dollars. That's something I'll be doing.
Val.
Thanks, Anita. So when I was the CEO of the BC Chamber of Commerce, I would travel all over BC. And I'll tell you what, when you go to small rural towns, the north, the interior in this province, they're saying the same thing. Look, we are lacking the adequate healthcare infrastructure we need to create thriving, inclusive, safe cities and towns. Shockingly, in a city with a population of almost 600,000 people, I'm actually hearing the same thing in Surrey. Doesn't make sense to me. Primary care, mental health support, seniors care, access to family doctors. I was talking to a room full of developers in Victoria, Vancouver Island a couple of weeks ago. And you'd be forgiven if you thought you were at a mental health care conference or a mental health conference, because half of the overdoses coming out of BC right now are coming out of the construction sector. So we need to be talking very innovative solutions now. So Anita, I actually think we need to get rid of health authorities in BC. 51 million people are serviced by the UK Health Authority. Let's have regional knowledge, but let's put it all under one umbrella.
Ellis.
We're really talking about accountability, and you got to remember who's in charge at the end of the day. It says government. It wasn't the health authorities that said that did nothing during the heat dome when over 700 people died. It wasn't them. It was the government that had to report and did nothing. In terms of the shortage of healthcare workers, there's too much downloaded responsibility to the municipalities to do anything about it. The province has got to get involved with that. And if you can go one step further, when we're talking about immigrants coming to this country with skills, Why is a doctor coming from a different country only allowed to work at Tim Hortons when we have such a critical shortage of healthcare workers across the board? I think this is a question of accountability. It goes up the line. The provincial government is ultimately responsible. That's where the buck's got to stop.
Renee.
Well, there was recently a report done on the cost and the access to healthcare in most of the G7, and Canada ranked 10th out of 11th. You know who is number 11? The US. I don't think that's a glowing commendation for Canada's healthcare system. And what I can tell you is that BC has even less ICU capacity and beds of any other province per capita across Canada. When the hospital expansion took place in Surrey, we actually increased the number of beds by 26% for an increase in population over that time frame of 24%. We were actually responding to the need. By the time this new hospital is opened, they will have increased the hospital beds by 24% for a population that will have risen by 50%. We need to get serious about a complete overhaul of the healthcare system. And right now, the NDP only care about bloating it. I would absolutely reform not just the authorities, but the entire system as a whole.
Gavin.
People in families in Surrey and Fraser Health area more broadly were hard hit by COVID. And I think when we talk about that, we need to start with empathy and accountability. We need to start by recognizing that those were people's children and families and parents and relatives and loved ones who passed away. And I think we need to recognize the truth that, in fact, there was a very poor job done of communicating and of addressing specific issues like multi-generational families that are more common in the Fraser Health catchment area and in Surrey. That's one of the many lessons I think we can learn from COVID. That's why I'm very proud more than 6 months ago to have called for a public inquiry into COVID. Not so we can all point fingers and say you were wrong and you were wrong and you were wrong, but so we can actually learn the lessons that we should learn and take them forward into things like health authority reform, into changes to long-term care, into changes to business support programs. We need to take this crisis and make sure that we learn from it, that we work together, and that we make things better for people and families.
This is my last question before closing remarks. And Michael, to you first, is international trade is an economic recovery ingredient. We have an international docking facility in Surrey. We're a border city. As I mentioned, we have the greatest number of manufacturers that are part of the global supply chain. How are you as a leader going to put international trade on the agenda?
BC is well positioned on the Asia Pacific region for increased trade. We need to continue to build those relationships, not do what the NDP did in December 2019 when they shut down all the trade offices in the Asia Pacific. That was wrong. We're basically saying to those countries and those business relationships, we're closed up. That was the wrong decision to do. We need to continue to build those relationships, market the BC brand. Fraser Surrey Docks, I had acted for the new owners until recently when they were changed ownership again. It's a very important piece of infrastructure for this region. We have a transportation advantage. The supply chain for the truckers, 3PL logistic companies, our port structure is advantage. We need to continue to support that and ensure that we have those trade routes and that we keep them strong through the rest of this pandemic, through the flood season as well.
Bill.
Microphone on. Anita, I love this question because this is how BC grows the pie. We don't grow the economy by trading and just doing business with each other. We look to the world. And this is a huge opportunity for us where we sit on the Pacific Rim. So I was meeting with Vivek Savkur today in Surrey, the CEO of the BC India Business Network. There is a relationship we should be amplifying big time. Tons of opportunity in India for our products, tons of opportunity in the European Union right now because they have told the world they will not import high carbon footprint products anymore. What does BC do well? We harvest some of the most sustainable low carbon products on planet Earth and we ship them to the world. We should be a low carbon jurisdiction of choice for people that need our products. I think BC should actually stand for better climate. I think we should advertise that to the world. Let's position ourselves as global traders. And let's get into markets all over the place that are looking for good, clean products.
Ellis.
The NDP shut down trade offices in Beijing specifically South Africa wants our lumber products to build houses. They also want our building standards, not a peep from this government. They actually didn't say anything when the $2.9 billion US cruise ship industry was saying they're not going to stop in Vancouver, Victoria, Prince Rupert anymore. We've got to think bigger when we're talking about this. And by the way, we got to think about value-added products, manufacturing. We can be making fertilizer out of LNG, for example. There's 2 projects proposed for BC in this regard. We're going backwards when we're talking about this. And when we're talking about this, the NDP are currently talking about taking away the value-added industry away from forestry. Those deferrals are going to have an impact on manufacturing here in Surrey for those that depend on the wood products coming. That actually translates to an international trade. Whether you're talking about the United States, South Africa, Beijing, it translates. We've got to get back to international trade.
Renee.
Well, the NDP have definitely sounded a signal that they are closed for business, and not just for BC businesses, but to the rest of the world, saying that we're not interested. And yes, my colleagues have actually shared about how we've closed down international trade offices, but it goes farther than that. You know, our top 5 exports in BC are actually all in the 4 out of the 5, sorry, are in the forestry sector. 26% of all of our exports are forestry related. We just passed 2 bills, not we, they passed 2 bills that sent shockwaves through the forestry industry. Yes, we're all in agreement that we want reinvention within the forestry sector, but that is not the way to do it. In order to actually promote trade and promote international trade, you have to be open for business. You have to formulate those relationships. You have to work with the federal government. You have to create your brand. And then you have to ally yourself with all of the different businesses that can be exported and make sure that they can get their goods to market.
Gavin.
International trade and investment depends on 2 things: relationships and infrastructure. We need to rebuild relationships, for example, by reopening trade offices. And we as a party also need to elect a caucus full of people who have experience doing international trade and who have cultural fluency with countries around the world with which we want to trade. We currently have no South Asian members of our caucus, and that has to change, as one example. When it comes to infrastructure, and in particular to direct investment into infrastructure here, trade enabling infrastructure, we have to realize that BC and more broadly Canada have become very scary jurisdictions for people to invest. Decisions about risk and capital investment don't just come down to corrupt kleptocratic regimes in emerging economies. It comes down to the stability and predictability of decision making, and we don't have that right now. So we have to restore stability and predictability to investment so we can build trade enabling infrastructure here in BC and grow our economy.
Kevin.
This is where I think experience and track record matter. When I was Minister of Transportation, I was also chair of the Asia Pacific Gateway Strategy. So we brought all the right people together, federal reps, provincial, local government, the railways, the ports, the airports. And we said, we need to put together a plan to make sure that we capitalize on the opportunity of a growing Asia. And that plan resulted in a lot of the investments that you've seen all across the #1 highway, the Kicking Horse Canyon, even the William Bennett Bridge, the Portman Bridge, the Pitt River Bridge, the investments in the Sea to Sky Highway, the port expansions in Vancouver and Delta, the expansions of the airports, not just Vancouver Airport, but Abbotsford and airports right across this province, because we recognize that at the end of the day, BC is a small province of 4 million people that are trading openly with economies around the world. And if we are to be successful, we need to have a strategy, execute on that strategy, get it done, and we will succeed and benefit from that vision.
1 minute for closing remarks, and Renee, will begin with you.
Awesome. Well, I started tonight by talking about some of the ways that we had failed in terms of listening with mental health, with public safety, with infrastructure like schools and hospitals. But we're not the only ones that have failed you. The NDP have made an inordinate amount of promises and have not delivered. They have not kept their promises in healthcare. They have not kept their promises in mental health or public safety or delivered new schools where there are portables currently. And the daycare spaces are still less than what we delivered in 2015 and 2016. But they've also made it worse for businesses. They've signaled that they are closed, and that's hurting our businesses. But we can do better. Without the social infrastructure, businesses will fail. But without a strong economy, we can't pay for the social programs that we desperately need. I know how to build, how to strategize, and I'm listening. I'm going to work hard, and together we can achieve great things.
Ellis.
Building an economy and balancing it with the environment is my background. It's what I did for 17 years, but I will never discount people. It's why I did it in the first place. That's why I keep going back to the 3 C's. Competitor. I've always competed for family, communities, and people. Courage. I'll continue to speak out on the toughest issues we're facing as a society today. It's the way I was raised, the way I was taught by my parents, who both went to residential school. Change. We've got to change the pathway of BC, and the BC Liberals are the party to do it. But the BC Liberals have to change. My vision for the future of British Columbia is the same vision that I had from our region back in 2003. But for this, we have to change. If we can do this as a party, we can change the pathway of BC. This is why I'm pushing to be the leader of the BC Liberals and ultimately the Premier of BC, because I believe in people and communities. That's why I do what I do. That's why I did what I did. Thank you.
Bill.
Today, I'm not running against the NDP. That's in 2024. Today, I'm running against the past, the old playbook, the old way of doing things. The clock is ticking for the BC Liberal Party. The clock is also ticking for Surrey because the future lives here. We got to get there fast. We got to figure it out. In the first debate, I made an analogy about how this party has been clicking remind me later when it comes to download the new operating system. You know what I mean? You flip open your laptop, prompts you to download the new operating system. We all click remind me later. It's natural. It's what we do. This party needs to download the new operating system, and Victoria and Ottawa need to download the new operating system for the south of the Fraser. So that is what I'm doing in this race. I'm bringing the new operating system to this party. I believe in this part of the Lower Mainland. I think you are going to lead BC into its future. My name is Val Litwin. Please go to my website, vallitwin.ca. I hope you'll join my team, or at a minimum, get to know me a little bit better. This is a delight to be here tonight. Thank you.
Michael.
Well, I'd like to thank Anita and the Surrey Board of Trade for organizing such a wonderful forum this evening. This is about winning. We have a lot of great ideas on this stage, but we won't be able to implement these ideas unless we win in the next election. And we do have to select the right person at the right time to lead our party, the BC Liberal Party. I am that person. I'm running to lead our party, to restore trust, to broaden the appeal for our party, and to win the next election. I am one of 4 MLAs in Vancouver and Surrey, alongside of Trevor, Stephanie, and Andrew. That's what it's gotten to for our team. We cannot win back government unless we win back our ground here in the Lower Mainland. I'm the one Vancouver MLA in this region that's been able to increase my vote share in the last election. We need to rebuild in a strong way. We need to be diverse and inclusive. Thank you.
Kevin.
You know, I was proud to represent Surrey for 13 years. And I can tell you, if we were to be successful as a party, that success won't happen unless we earn the support of this community. And why is this community such an important part of our future? Because it represents everything that is great about British Columbia. Its diversity, the entrepreneurship that we see in Surrey, the fact that there's just this incredible charitable sector, nonprofit sector that works together to solve issues, whether it's women's of options or other community endeavors that take place every day in this community. It's phenomenal. And I can tell you this, when I announced my campaign, I said, we need to talk about competitive tax rates. We need to talk about affordable childcare. We need to be leaders in the environment again. We need to make sure that we're talking about affordable housing. That's the BC Liberal of the future. That is the BC Liberal Party that will get us elected. Leadership and experience and competence matter. Thank you.
Gavin.
Thank you so much for all being here tonight and taking time away from your families. I was reflecting earlier that yesterday was my son's first birthday party. It was a good, fun party. A year ago today, I was sitting in a hospital room with my wife deciding whether or not to run in this election, this leadership campaign. It's been really long, but it's been really reflective. It is healthy. We're all having so many conversations we wouldn't be having if we were rushing this thing. We're all getting to have long conversations with individual members. I spent half an hour on the phone with a brand new BC Liberal in the parking lot today. That's what this is about. It's about reflecting on who we are and where we go from here. And central to that is families. To win the next election, we need to put people and families back at the heart of who we are, what we do, and how we talk about ourselves. That's what I've been doing throughout my campaign. That's who I am. That's what I'll continue to do. And I'm asking for your support in that mission. Thank you very much.
To the candidates on stage and to the viewers listening in live via Facebook, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I just wanted to mention that the future is already here in Surrey. Surrey is an opportunity city right now. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much to our sponsor, the BM Group of Companies, and a round of applause to our candidates on stage. Our best wishes to you and make it a great business week. Thank you so much.